conditioning. And the Screen magazine, in its second issue, tried to explain things. And he wanted to know that what he could do if they would a greater city, become a monument to the courage and faith of the undaunted Americans. Buffalo Hunter, who with his radio made the old from these broken streets and hundred roads.
Chelmsford is fortunate to have some of the most interesting people around, and I'm fortunate that I get to talk to them and interview them. And I'm going to be talking to Dick Lahue today, and this is a combination project. We're trying to get a historical archive that's going to be available both in the Chelmsford Library over at Chelmsford Telemedia, and then this is also going to be submitted to a veterans project that we're working with in conjunction with the Chelmsford Senior Center. As a matter of fact, if you know any veterans, particularly older ones, we're trying to get their histories and have them recorded and videotaped. And you can contact us at Chelmsford Telemedia, 978-251-5143, and we'd love to talk to you about it. Anyway, Dick Lahue is here, and he's been involved with all sorts of different Chelmsford activities for a number of years. And Dick, I want to thank you for joining us here at the Chelmsford Telemedia Studios. Before we get right into your military career during World War II and stuff, I'd like to talk, have a look into your background a little bit and stuff. You were raised, you spent your primary years in Dracut?
I was born and raised in Dracut.
What year were you born in again?
1918.
1918.
In Dracut, what they call Dracut Center.
Yeah.
And went to primary school there. And at about 11 or 12, after the Depression fell in 29, we moved to Lowell. And I went to the Barnum Junior High School through the 9th grade, and then went to the Lowell High School through the last remaining 3 years, and graduated in 1938.
Dracut during the 20s, was that a kind of a country town, or?
Oh, it was very farm country. In fact, the early years, my sisters had to go to Lowell High because they had no high school in those early years. And it was only later on, it was after even I left there that they built a high school. And I remember the first school, first junior high they built, my brother worked on it, and the man that built it, his name was Clow, and he lived in Chelmsford, and he was the builder of it. And so I went into a brand new school in the 6th grade, which was kind of unique. We're so used to being in these old 8-room schoolhouses.
And I don't want to know how much it cost them to build back then.
Well, I'll tell you, it wasn't anywhere near what it is today, that's for sure.
You moved to Lowell, and Lowell at that time was a city.
Oh, sure.
And it was an industrialized...
Industrial city. It became a city in 1836.
And was that a was it a shocking transition coming from a farm and moving into a city? Or?
More or less, because although, as I say, I used to go to my father's shop, and it was around the city more than some kids were from Dracut.
Yeah.
I helped him every Saturday.
Yeah.
And so I'd be running around the city getting stuff and delivering things to the mills. And
what kind of shop did he have?
Well, he made brushes. It was a machine shop. And originally it was built, in fact, he along with a couple of men built the first car in Lowell. And they had a big ramp where they used to take the car up, and that's where they painted it and everything. And it just fizzled out, I guess. They run out of money.
Yeah.
And so working, and so my grandfather, as I say, started this with realizing how many pots were being broken in the mill, and he wanted to perfect some things that lasted longer, and so he had patents on things, and brushes and loom attachments, and he ran that until he died, and then my father took over and ran that until he passed away.
How did the business thrive? I mean...
Oh, yes. Yes, well, we brought up 6 children.
Yeah.
You know.
But during the Depression, I mean, Lowell was hit hard during the Depression, wasn't it?
It was very hard, and I think the only reason we were, survived was my father had an uncle who lived in New Brunswick, and who passed away and left my father $10,000.
Which was a lot of money then.
Yes, it was a lot of money in stocks. And that's actually what kept us going.
Yeah.
Of course, business picked up after that, and the mills down south would begin to buy supplies and things.
Do you remember Lowell during the Depression?
Oh, sure. I remember it was thousands of people on the street. Thousands of them. Because in the mills, there were thousands of people worked in the mills because there was a mile of mills along the Merrimack River. And Hamilton, the Appleton, the Tremont and Suffolk, and the hosiery and the bleachery, and they all made cloth.
So was this, when the Depression hit, was this something that occurred gradually, or did it, obviously the stock market dropped out and stuff, but everybody wasn't laid off the next day, or?
Well, very close to it.
Oh, really?
Very close to it. And the mills were trying to cut down the overhead, and the cotton was in south, so they moved to the south near the cotton. Most of the people employed in the mill were colored people, and it was cheaper labor and no transportation costs. And the South made concessions to them with water rights and things to induce them to come down there so that the economy would improve in that area. And it took lots of time for Lowell to recuperate and to get new industries coming in and new people starting businesses just like any economy.
Yeah.
Even today. But it was very bad. I can remember bread lines, people getting in line to get flour, and you only got a little bit of a bag of it, and they gave you whatever the government surplus they had. Sometimes it was meat, sometimes it was butter, and mostly flour and things that you could cook with. And
of course, there wasn't any Social Security.
There was no money whatsoever.
So if you ran out of money...
Nothing. I can remember having the last 5 cents in the house to go to the store for a loaf of bread.
Wow.
The last 5 cents at that time.
Was there a sense of impending doom or fear or something?
I'll tell you, everybody was in the same boat.
Yeah.
I mean, your neighbors, you just brought up and lived under the same circumstances. You didn't have a rich person here and a poor person here. Everybody was poor. So you really didn't make an awful lot of it.
Sure.
My mother made clothes, she was a good seamstress, and she kept us well dressed.
Yeah.
Some of the clothes itched like hell, but I don't know what they were made of, but they weren't other the fancy things. But at least she was proud, and she wanted to always look nice when we went to church.
Yeah.
And we all went to church together, and so it's really, I think it was a wonderful experience to go through because it made you appreciate things more, and it made you be more careful with things. You were sure you didn't throw anything away because you could use it later on. And my God, I'm still that way because my kids come to me, you got this, and I got it somewhere. And it just, I don't know, you grew up that way.
Now, out of curiosity, though, you had a sister who went off to University of California?
Right.
In Santa Barbara, was it?
Yes.
And I'm just, what year was that?
That would be in the 30s, in the late 30s.
So despite your family kind of suffering through the Depression, she was able to go off
right.
to university, which was a lot cheaper then.
Yeah. And plus, I, as a child, I used to go in the summertime during that period, and I worked in Littleton on a farm. They were friends of my family, and I lived there all summer, and get paid a little. But the thing was, it was one less mouth to feed.
Yeah.
And so that made it easier. And I used to come home on Sundays. And
what kind of farm was it?
Oh, it was a big one. It was right on Great Road. There's a lot of industry buildings in and out. Originally, it was called the town farm.
Oh, okay.
And these people bought it, and they had 6 children, and they all bought farms afterwards. In fact, I can remember plowing a field over in Air where the National Hospital is, right where that sits. We used to raise corn there.
Yeah.
And one of the other brothers owned a farm across the street, Hilltop Farm. But anyway, that was a family I lived with. And then my other brother worked up in Marsh Hill Road in Dracut on a farm. In fact, I worked there for a while. I used to lead the horse for the farmer. His name was Roy Clough. And I'd lead the horse while he cultivated between the rows of corn. And you get down the end of the row and turn around.
So you're using a horse instead of a tractor back then?
Oh, yeah, they didn't have tractors then. It was a horse.
Yeah.
Everything was done by horse.
Tractors were soon to come, though, right?
Well, yeah, they started coming in the 20s.
No, in the 20s.
The Fordsons was one of the early ones.
Yeah.
And that was a great improvement.
Yeah.
Oh, with all the attachments, one guy could run it and cut down the labor help. And
Now you graduated from high school in 1938.
Right.
You went to high school with your wife, who you said you just celebrated your 63rd
I was 21.
anniversary.
I was 21 when I got married, and she was 18.
And at that point, when you got married, you were working as
I was working for my brother.
Okay.
He was a building contractor. He bought a lot of land in Chelmsford off Dalton Road, Woodlawn, Jensen.
And so in
Mile and
1940, we were coming out of the Depression.
Right, and he started to build houses, and of course the veterans coming home from service needed a house.
Yeah. Out of curiosity, how much was a house back
I
then?
built a house on Arbor Road for $3,800.
$3,800.
Right, and it was a cape.
Yeah.
And I added more to it later as the family grew, but
Right.
it was a nice house, had a porch.
Yeah, a little bit. The house now would probably be about.
Well, I sold it for about 20-some thousand.
Yeah, and now it'd probably sell for about 300,000 or something. Yeah.
And
now in 1940 and then 1941 and stuff, you were hearing a lot of news about the
war.
what was going on in Europe, the war
Right,
in Japan and stuff.
and the
Were you keeping informed of all this? Or?
Oh, sure. I mean, I was conscious of it because I was of age to go.
Right. Yeah.
But I was married,
Yeah.
and in the draft, you were exempt if you were married,
Okay.
and if you had a child,
Yeah.
or you were working in a defense factory. So I had started to work. Of course, the building trade just stopped because everything that was used needed to go for the war effort.
Yeah.
And so I got a job in North Andover at Davis and Ferber, who made textile machinery. And I worked in a machine shop there with a couple of friends of mine. And I knew the boss. In fact, I went to school with one of his boys, Marty Boudreau. And then I said to one of the fellows I was working with, his name was Gordon White, I said, Whitey, I'm going down to the United Shoe Machinery Corporation in Beverly. I said, they're doing defense work and big bucks down there. So I went down, and funny, I got the job and he didn't because he wasn't married and he was eligible for the draft.
Yeah.
So I worked there for, a couple of years, I guess. And they made 37 millimeter cannons there, the complete thing. And I worked on the breech blocks and the breech rings, and then I got a job rifling the barrels, which was a lucrative job because you just sit there and let the machine do the work.
Oh, really? Yeah.
Made the rifling in the...
Yeah.
And you got good pay for it. And we worked 12 hours a day.
Yeah.
4 days on, 2 off. And so that meant that during the week I'd be off Tuesday and Wednesday. The next week, Wednesday and Thursday and Friday. So it took about 6 weeks to make the cycle.
Yeah.
But I'd go down shopping on Merrimack Street, and that's when everybody shopped on Merrimack Street. And boy, I'd look around, and I was about the only young guy around. It'd be either invalids or cripples or older people, and I had such a guilty conscience.
Yeah.
I said to my wife, I'm going to enlist.
But at the same time, you're a father. You have a child.
Yes, I had a 2.5-year-old son. It was a
Yeah.
very difficult decision to make. So I went up to the draft board.
And what was your wife's reaction to?
Well, hey, everybody realized that this was survival.
Yeah.
And if you let Hitler get away with continuing this, heaven only knows what would
Sure.
happen over here.
Right, yeah.
And I think that was the attitude of most people, and they
Yeah.
just felt that he was a tyrant and needed to be stopped.
Yeah.
And so I went up, and boy, in wasn't too many days, and I was exempt. I could have stayed out for
Yeah.
I don't know how much longer.
So
But
you were how old when you joined up?
I was about 25.
About 25, and you went to, I mean, did you pick up?
No, I went down and I told one to be in the Navy. I had a brother in the Army, and he said to me, "Don't go in the Army." He said, "Cut your arm off, do anything." He said, "Don't go in the Army."
Oh, really?
And he had a tough time. But anyway, he was a younger brother.
Yeah.
And so I said, I'll volunteer for the Navy.
Yeah.
Well, that's what they sent me, right down to Boston. I was inducted in the Navy, and
So you went to the recruiter there, you signed the papers.
yeah, and yet you didn't come home.
Oh, you didn't come home?
Oh,
You just, they
That's
shipped
it.
you right off from
They
there.
put you on the bus
You didn't
and
have
off.
a month to
No, off
party
you went.
around or something like that?
so I was shipped off to Sampton, New York, way up near beyond Rochester.
Now, had you spent any time on boats before that?
No, outside of a rowboat, probably.
Okay, so you hadn't done any ocean
No,
voyages or
no,
anything?
No, I never had any experience of being at sea, so
Yeah.
to speak. But I did my boot camp there, and I came home for leave, and then I had to go back there, and was around for a few days, and you had to get lined up every day for muster. And if there wasn't anything for you to do that day, you had liberty, or you could do what you wanted. But you had to be there every morning.
And where was this you had
This
to be?
was Sampson, New York.
Okay,
And that's what you had your basic training.
yeah.
And you had to go to fire school, and you had to go into a place with gas must.
How long was your basic training there for?
I think it was 10 weeks.
10 weeks.
They were shortening it up because they needed you
Yeah.
so badly that they shortened up the training.
Now, were
period.
they going to send you on to a special school from
Well,
there? Or?
as I was saying, when we lined up, they said, "All right, line up. All you guys, your name is called, stand over there." And my name got called. And as I went by the guy calling them out, I looked up at the top of the thing and said, "I'm God's Training Center, Gulfport, Mississippi." So that's where I went. And then after we had weeks of gunnery training, we went out into the Gulf of Mexico on a ship, and we had target practice of a plane would pull a target, and we would shoot at it with 20 millimeter cannons.
Okay.
And boy, the guy took a chance, because you're on there, and that gun was moving all over the place.
Right.
You
Well,
did-
how far back was the
well, you were
target?
quite a ways from it. He was up in the air, but I mean, it just, they were going all over
Yeah,
the place. You
yeah.
know? But it was training, and after that training, the same thing happened. Line up. You're going to.
How long did the training last for?
That was another couple of months.
Yeah.
And so in.
Now, out of curiosity, I mean, you're all of a sudden thrown into
I
a
went
new
in
environment.
June.
Was this a shock to the system, or do you think you were
Well,
adjusting?
not for me at 25. Although I went in June and June 9th, and a lot of young fellas, kids just out of high school, went in.
Yeah.
And boy, they were lonesome. You know, when night came, they wanted their mothers, and you know, I was like a father image
Yeah.
in my group. I was in G12, they call
Yeah.
it. And you know, I used to help them sew buttons.
Oh.
You know, I was like a father to a
Yeah.
lot of them.
Sure.
And but it was good training, and I met some wonderful guys.
Yeah.
And but then they
So they called out your name
lined
again.
us up again.
Yeah.
Said, "Get in line." And when I went by again, of course, I was curious, because you could have been shipped anywhere. It said the Armed Guard Center in Brooklyn, New York. I said, "Oh, good. I'll be on the East Coast anyway."
Yeah.
Because I could have gone to New Orleans, or I could have gone to San Francisco,
Yeah.
and which meant that I'd be in the Atlantic anyway. But I was thinking so much of being near home rather,
Sure.
as opposed to being
And that's
in the-
pretty close to home.
Yeah. So you went there too long, and they lined you up, and we got a lot of heavy clothes, parkas and heavy underwear and stockings and and mittens, and so I said, geez, I must be going someplace where it's cold. So anyway, we got assigned to a ship, and they pulled into Greenpoint, Brooklyn, and they said, well, you're going to have to eat off the ship for a while because they're going to insulate it. So that made it even more suspicious we were going someplace where it was cold.
Yeah.
So anyway, after the ship was loaded, we were loaded with supplies, ammunition. Not all ships had ammunition. Some had ammunition, some had supplies.
Yeah.
And on ours, we had 2 80-ton locomotives on the decks, strapped to the decks
Wow.
with big turnbuckles that were welded to the
Yeah.
decks. And in the cargo bay areas were the wheels and the railroad cars,
Wow.
flat cars. That's what we took to Russia.
Yeah.
And they were the narrow gauge. Today, this is
So just to be clear, you were assigned to a cargo ship.
yes. I was in the
how
Armed
large,
Guard, which was a Navy gunner
Yeah.
on a merchant ship. There were about anywhere from 17 to 27 men on cargo ships, which were the gunners. And you had a lieutenant, usually, that was your officer.
And then, but you also had merchant marines
Oh, they ran the ship.
who,
They were the firemen. They were in the ship, and
Okay.
they unloaded the ship, and they ran the ship.
yeah,
And they got good pay.
and you didn't.
I got $60 a month.
$60 a month. Oh,
Yeah.
okay.
And I stood out in this cold because you had watch every day.
Yeah.
You'd stand out in the gun tubs. One had binoculars and one had the phones.
So these were open.
Oh, you stood right in the gun tubs. You walked
Yeah.
around. And I can remember going across the Atlantic. It snowed so hard that the snow was building up in the gun tub, and pretty soon, you were getting up so that the gun tub is here instead of here. So we had to take fire axes and chop the.
So what would the route be when you went across?
Well,
the
the first place we went was to up through the Irish Sea into Scotland.
Okay.
We went to a place called Lahue, Scotland.
Yeah.
But first we went to Glasgow, or it was a little town outside of it. We had to take the train to go to Glasgow. We went through Paisley. You've heard of Paisley shawls. That was a manufacturing
Yeah.
place, and we went to a place called Gorick and Greenock,
Yeah.
and that's where we were anchored. And then we went from there, if we took the train to Glasgow,
Yeah.
when we were waiting to form another convoy to go to Russia,
Okay.
to Murmansk, Russia. And finally, we got together with the other ships, and we went to a place called Lahue, which was northern Scotland. It was
Yeah.
very bleak and cold.
What do you remember? What month this was?
Yes, this was in late November.
Late November of 1944.
Right. And then we went on into Russia, Murmansk. And now, as I said, the Germans occupied all the coast of Norway, and that's where the submarine pins were. And they were sinking ships. They were convoys of 100 ships, and 10 would get through
Yeah.
in the early stages. In our convoy, we had, and a convoy is you were in line. You were 1,000 feet apart and 500 feet apart, front and back.
Okay.
And you had to watch on that you didn't run into one another on the rough seas, because you were up and down, up and down.
You hit some extremely rough seas.
Right, especially in the North Atlantic.
Yeah.
And so you were afraid of running into one another. But you couldn't have your running lights on. No lights could be seen anywhere. When you went from one place to another, the black curtain, and that curtain had to be closed before you could go outside so that no light would come on.
Yeah.
Because they said you could see a match for 10 miles. Somebody lit a match. You could see it for 10 miles. So you had to be very careful about being spotted. Then we went and finally, on the way to Russia, an interesting thing, we had a little called a flat top, which was a airplane carrier.
Yeah.
But it was just a Liberty ship with a flat top. So you only had a couple of reconnaissance planes
Okay.
that would run out ahead of you, see if they could spot any icebergs or submarines or anything, and they would come back and report.
Were there a lot of icebergs?
Well,
floating?
yes, but we took one that was a little closer to the coast.
Yeah.
So we weren't as close to like Iceland and Greenland as some convoys. And I can remember on our ship, you're in convoy, and we had DEs running. Now, just DEs is a destroyer escort.
Yeah.
And they could pick up the sounds. And they would run in and out of your convoy to pick up any sub or any noise whatsoever. And those guys were terrific. They should have got submarine pay because, my God, those little things were underwater more than they were up, because it was down and up, and the waves were very high. And but they were something. And I can remember one of those planes come in one time, and it overshot the thing and off and went into the water, and you just keep going.
Really? They didn't pick up the pilot?
Well, that's up to the DEs.
Oh,
I mean,
okay.
you don't stop.
Yeah.
But then our ship blew a steam gasket, and we were dead in the water. And don't you think that wasn't scary? Because you know the submarines around.
Yeah.
And you're saying, geez, here you are all alone. And
none of the convoy could wait for you.
Just kept going.
Yeah.
So we finally, the Merchant Marines, they put a new gasket in and sealed up whatever the leak was.
How long did that take?
Well, it was about 10 hours.
Okay.
So we really had to speed up a little bit to get to the convoy.
Yeah.
And when we got to Murmansk, each harbor had submarine nets. Now they were they were weaved with cables, and in fact they made some up at Fletcher's Quarry during the war. That was one of their projects, and they were like on a gate, and the boats would open it up and you could get inside. It was to keep the submarines out of the harbor.
Right.
And once we got into Murmansk, it was cold.
Was it?
Oh, cold. The snow, and they were all dressed up with heavy coats, and all you could see was these red faces. You couldn't tell whether they were a man or a woman.
Yeah.
And they worked in the ship, on the docks, unloading. And
was this a large harbor? It must have been at the time, because it was
two
one
up
of the
there.
major ports of
Archangel
entry.
was one, and Murmansk was another.
Yeah.
And that was the northern port. And the reason we went there at that time of the year was because it's dark 24 hours a day. There's no sunlight at that time of the year. In the summertime, it's sun all the time. They call it the land of the midnight sun. But we went when it was dark, and I didn't see the sun for 76 days. Till we come back again. So when we were there, we couldn't even go ashore. It was funny, we were bringing supplies to the Russians, and they wouldn't even talk to you. In fact, they were afraid to talk to you. And I can remember one episode, there was a young fella, Russian, he was standing guard on the docks, and he slipped and fell down in between the water, and he lost his gun, and boy, the cops come and took him away, and if they didn't find that gun, they'd shoot him because they figured it was sabotage. I mean, they were awfully cold and hard-hearted. And I can remember somebody, they were swinging around one of the flat cars in the hole with a big crane, and it kind of swung around and it pinned one of the Russians right against the bulkhead.
Yeah.
And so they had to send down, all they did was take a pallet. They didn't send down a stretcher, just a wooden pallet. And they put this person on it and they pulled him up.
Did he live?
They put him on a truck, and on the back of a truck, and boom, boom, boom up the road. Well, he died, but they were, I just never got to understand them. Yeah. And finally, we were able to go ashore. Yeah. We got a few Russian
hold on, Dick. What I'd like to do, and I want to hold that thought till, because I'd like to spend another show with you, because we just ran out of time.
Oh, I'm not talking too much.
Absolutely not. That's the point of it. What we'll do is we will get together and finish this up, because I find this completely interesting.
That I have lots of places I went after that were very interesting.
Yeah, I definitely want to hear about that. So, if you can stick around, we'll do another half hour, and thank you for being with us too. Hi, my name is Matt Scott, and I want to welcome you back to the second part of an interview with Dick Lahue. This is the history show in which we talk to various residents who have great histories to talk about. And Dick, when we left last time, just to briefly summarize, you spent your primary years in Dracut growing up on a farm. You lived in Lowell, worked around your father's metal shop there, married your high school sweetheart in 1940, had a child, and then joined the Navy and were shipped off on, what was the name of the cargo ship that you shipped off on?
SS Nelson W. Aldrich.
SS Nelson W. Aldrich.
Right, that was the first one.
Yeah, and you had been through basic training. You had gone to gunnery school down in Mississippi, and then they sent you to Brooklyn, gave you a pair of mittens and some long underwear, and you were off to Murmansk. I'll never be able to pronounce that right.
Murmansk.
CK. Okay.
Murmansk.
And you first got there, and you described it as a pretty unfriendly place.
Well, I think that the soldiers were suspicious. Everybody seemed to be suspicious of you, and they were afraid to talk to you even. And we tried to be friendly with them because most Americans are very liberal, and liberal in the sense that you want to do anything for anybody.
Yeah.
And so we tried to give them oranges and chocolate bars, and God, they would look around and shove them in their coat, and for fear somebody would see them, and it just was a very uncomfortable feeling.
And of course, you were talking about when you were there that you were there for 72 days originally.
No, this was between the time I left Scotland.
Okay.
And went to Russia.
Yeah.
And got back where we saw sun again.
Okay, 72 days without sunlight. So you're at this port, and
we're at this port, and they were unloading the ship.
Yeah, and so it's dark there anyway.
Oh yeah, it's dark.
Were there a lot of other American ships there and
well,
stuff?
there was about 3 or 4 in that port. See, the ships in the convoy all didn't go into Murmansk. Some went to another port called Archangel.
Were you involved with the unloading of equipment or anything?
No.
So basically,
that's
during
that
time that you're in port, what are you doing with yourself?
Well, you just stand watch on the ship in shifts, 8 on, 4 on, 8 off.
Yeah.
Unless you hit what they call general alarm, then you're on unlimited.
Right.
There's no end to it.
But while you're in port, it's
just kind of watching that.
Yeah.
Things don't get to the guns and the ammunition or anything. You were taking care of the Navy property, so to speak.
Now, were you allowed to go on to shore, out to a bar, restaurant?
Eventually, we were able to get some Russian rubles. The consulate there gave us, we exchanged some American money for Russian rubles, and they allowed us to go to a bombed-out hotel. Parts of it was still standing. And the only thing you could get was vodka. And boy, was it potent. We put it in a saucer.
Did you go with a bunch of guys?
Yeah, the guys off the ship. And because you had a crew, always stayed on ship.
Yeah. Nobody spoke English. I mean, nobody spoke Russian.
Oh, no. It's funny. No matter where you are, you can make yourself known in some way.
Right, yeah.
Through motions and whatever. But we knew when we went there, and of course they knew we wanted to have something to drink. There was nothing else to do. It was very bleak. And so we poured some of this vodka in a saucer and lit it, and it was just like your gas stove burning.
And you drank it, though.
Yeah. It warmed just
Well, I guess there's not a whole lot else to do.
No. I mean, there were no nightclubs. There was nothing to go.
So would you stay in the hotel and have some, or you'd go back to the ship?
Yeah.
Which so it wasn't you didn't get involved with some of your
and the people. No, you didn't get involved with them all. Other than the people who might have waited on you.
Yeah.
And you get back to the ship, and that's all you could do up there. There was nothing else to do. But we needed to bring supplies to them because in the off season or the other time of the year, and I made a trip, which I'll go into later. You went in through the Mediterranean and through the Indian Ocean in Iraq. And they took the supplies by train to Russia in the summertime.
So after your first delivery,
Well,
what were your...
in order to come back, we had to load the ship with pulpwood for ballast. Fill the hold right up with pulpwood, because you're like a cock on the water up there in the Atlantic with no ballast. So finally, we started back, and it was stormy. It was so stormy that we were not allowed on deck to walk on the deck. You got out of the gun tub and you went down a ladder into the shaft alley, through the shaft alley, and then up to where you would eat in the dining room.
And what was, out of curiosity, what was that like? I mean, was the ship...
It was so rough. And you had a bunk, and it had a bar about this high on the front, and in the middle you got into it, and then it was the same on the other end. And I used to get my shoulder under it and my feet wrapped around the other one. That's the only way I could stay in bed when it was rough, because the ship would pitch. And what I mean when pitching is when the front goes up and then goes down, and the back end comes out, and that screw comes out of the water, that propeller.
Yeah.
And it revs up. And when it hits the water again, it's just like a whip. You can hear it travel right through the ship. And it would do that until it got, the storm subsided or it got a little calmer, but boy, it was rough. So the convoy separated. We couldn't stay together, it was so rough. So I wound up in Reykjavik, Iceland, pulled into port, and until things got calm. And we formed the convoy again, and boy, it got rough again, so we pulled into the Faroe Islands. And that's a ways from Iceland. It's coming towards the States. And
I haven't heard of the Faroe Islands.
Well, they're on the map.
Okay.
And it's very rocky.
Yeah.
High rocks and
there are people living there.
Oh, yeah. And there was a station,
yeah.
Relay station for telephones and the cables, the Atlantic cables. And anyway, we pulled in and we anchored till it calmed down. And I happened to be on watch one night, and I kept looking, and I thought, geez, we're getting awful close to these rocks, this ledge. And, after a while, you imagine things. So finally, I had a phone. I called the bridge. I said, geez, I don't know, maybe it's me, but boy, we're getting awful close to this ledge. We're floating right into it.
Yeah.
Boy, the engine started up, and they pulled away. We were getting close. So the trouble was we lost an anchor.
Oh, and you didn't realize it?
An anchor had come loose, and we were just floating.
Oh, okay.
So we pulled out again, and they had an awful time trying to get then the other anchor to catch. Finally, it caught on something, and it held. So by the time that, and then in a day or two, they got calm again.
How large a ship are we talking about, by the way?
It was about 500 feet long.
Okay.
A Liberty ship. They built hundreds of them.
Yeah.
And this was a brand new one, built in Brooklyn, New York. And so the time to go, we lift up the anchor, and what's on it but the cable, the transatlantic cable.
Uh-oh, that could be a problem.
They dropped the anchor again and come up still on. And they're blinking, on the station, the message going back and forth. The signalman of blinking. Yeah. And, they're saying, don't do anything with it. And boy, our captain was, because he was a cargo captain.
Yeah.
They took a fire axe and cut that damn thing. He said, cut it.
Cut the anchor?
No, cut the cable.
You're kidding me.
He cut the cable up there to that island.
Is that cutting out the phone service between the United States and Europe?
Communications up for that area.
But
there must have been hell to pay, because, boy, when he got back to the States, his company, whoever he worked for, It must have been hell to pay. Because,
Sure. Well, all of a sudden, because if that's a
well,
relay station.
He didn't want to lose that anchor because if we lost the other one, and we wouldn't have had any anchor.
Yeah.
So, but anyway, we didn't have anything to do with that. But I mean, that's what happened.
Yeah.
So anyway, we got pulled into Portland, Maine, to drop the pulpwood off for the paper mills. And I got leave. And there was a friend of mine.
How long had the entire journey been, by the way?
Oh, maybe 45 days.
45 days? Yeah. And at that point, were you just dying to get off the ship?
Yeah, you got kind of used to it.
Oh, you did get kind of used to it, so.
And it was a routine.
Yeah.
And, you know, you were on watch and then you were off. And you ate and you slept and you're on watch.
Right. Did you have any movies or anything like that?
No, we had just record players.
Record players, okay.
And just as a little note in between there, I was on with some Southerners from down in Natchez, Mississippi.
Yeah.
And they were real Southerners, and they were real, didn't like the Northerners too well.
They didn't?
No.
Still fighting the Civil War there. Huh?
So we had to live with them, but they still fighting the Civil War.
Yeah.
And so they used to play a record, No Letter Today. Oh, God, I heard that thing so many times. I got so sick of it that I threw it over the side.
Did you really?
And of course, if they ever knew who threw it over, they'd have thrown me over the side. But anytime they would have one that they just played and played and played, I'd throw it over. So,
who was the record by, out of curiosity?
Oh, I don't
remember?
know. It was very common during the war. One of those popular ones that was played all the time. But that's all we had.
And you wanted
to
hear the big band sounds?
Well, we had the ones we had Artie Shaw and we had Glenn Miller and, you know,
and
Benny
they didn't
Goodman.
like that.
Oh, that wasn't up their alley. You know, Christ, no, they wanted to sing-song stuff. You know?
Right, yeah.
And, I mean, that's fine, but not all day long.
Sure.
So, but anyway, we got back to the States, and I got leave. I came home, and the fellow that stood with me lived in Newark, New Jersey, and he said, you know, I'm going to get off the ship when we get in New York because I'm eligible for leave. So he said, I'll take your duty so you can stay home longer, because we used to get 4 days port leave.
Yeah.
That didn't count against your annual leave. Your annual leave was you get a half a day for every month you were in the service, when you were in duty. But when you were on the ship, you got shore leave. That was port leave, and it wasn't counted against you. So I got 8 days instead of 4 days. And the ship left there and went through the Cape Cod Canal into New York. I wasn't on it. I met them in.
And that was okay?
Sure. I mean, I went right from home to New York.
Yeah.
I'd get on the train in the little depot, and I'd go and be in New York in time to be on the ship by 8 o'clock in the morning. And it was great because there were women on the train that would give you cigarettes and candy, and, you know, they'd walk up and down the train, try to do what they could for the servicemen.
Yeah.
And finally, when I got to New York, I had to go back to the Armed Guard Center and waiting to be reassigned to another ship. And in the meantime, if you weren't called the first thing in the morning, you had liberty for the day until the next morning at 8 o'clock. So I went across to New Jersey to visit this guy that was on leave. Well, we didn't get beyond about 2 or 3 pubs, you know, and of course his friends were so happy to see him that I didn't get back to the ship anyway.
Oh, really?
I had to sleep with his uncle. And finally I had to get up early to get back.
Yeah.
And I remember it was Easter morning. And I came through the tunnel, and I crossed Fifth Avenue, and here's all these people going to St. Patrick's Cathedral in their finest. Oh, the hats and the gloves and the flowers. It was one of them, and just by accident. And I remember that so well. I thought, my God, wasn't I lucky to come that morning?
Yeah.
So anyway, I got back to the ship, and I was assigned to another ship, the USS Santa Barbara. Now, it was
that another Liberty ship?
No, it was a Grace Line ship. It was part cargo and part passenger.
Okay.
It was a Grace Line. You could travel on it.
Yeah.
There was a Santa Rosa, Santa Barbara, and Santa Maria. and I was on the Santa Barbara. And it had what they call reefers. It had refrigerators in as the cargo so that they could send meat and stuff, things to keep frozen. And so, and they had other things too, supplies going over to the Army. And that trip, I went over to Antwerp, Belgium. Went through the Seine River. It was kind of unique because the Dutch live on these boats. That's their home. They live on the boats, and all the wooden shoes were all lined up with the big ones and the kids and everything. And I was in the spring, and the tulips were just acres and acres of tulips you could see from the river. And we wound up in Antwerp, but it was still, the war was still on.
Still, because as a matter of fact, that was around the time of the battle, or after the Battle
right,
of the Bulge?
because they were sending these U-2s over.
Yeah.
And they were unmanned. And I can remember we were in port, and most people don't realize, but Antwerp was one of the biggest seaports in the world. I mean, you don't hear much about it. It was enormous. And
had that been bombed at all during the war?
oh yeah, and these U-2s would come over.
Yeah.
And one landed about 2 ships from us in the water, and it didn't explode. It just plopped in the water.
Really?
And but anyway, we got. I went to. We had Liberty there, and it was great. You know, we went to see.
That's a little bit more.
Oh, they were
bright
civilized.
Than,
yeah, they were civilized and nice people.
Yeah.
And I was there till the ship unloaded.
Yeah.
And then we.
Were you with the same crew, or would you?
Oh,
was
no,
it a
we got
new?
a whole
I mean,
new crew. I was never on with
Okay.
2 guys again.
Okay, so you would just be shipped around.
Yeah,
different-
you'd be assigned, and I
Yeah.
was a Navy gunner.
Right.
That was my job.
Yeah.
Some of them were signalmen, or radiomen, or hot shellmen. Hot shellman is a guy that catches those shells after it's fired, and it pops out of that gun, and they have asbestos gloves that are up to here. So when they come out, they catch these hot shells and put them in and shove another one in. And boy, I've seen those pop around. They'd hit your cheek, and you could hear the sizzle.
Yeah.
They were just about red hot.
Wow.
And that's when the Merchant Marine helped us during whenever there was any activity going on, either an air raid or whatever. They helped to come with the ammunition. They would help you with the ammunition because we were short. We were short-handed. But other than that, they just took care of the ship. So when we got back into port, especially if we had any raids at any time, they would give us a little extra dough because, boy, they said you protected us while we were there.
Right.
And they made big bucks.
Yeah.
So every time there was an air raid, they got $125. You know.
Really?
Yeah, plus their pay.
Yeah.
And they'd leave there several $1,000s when they get back. And so a few bucks wouldn't mean anything to them. You know.
Sure,
They'd wind up at the first pub anyway.
Yeah.
But that was a kind of an interesting trip. And then
And was it? I being on one of those ships, working with the Merchant Marines and stuff. Did you? I mean, did you have access to some things that maybe you didn't have being on a Navy ship?
Oh yeah, because you see that was a ship that used to carry passengers. So the dining hall and everything was.
So you had good food?
Oh, we always had good food. We had 4 Chinese cooks, and we had steak and roast and stuff. That's one thing they fed you good.
Yeah.
And I can remember, saying, "Hey, throw that off. There's too much fat on it." And there's people couldn't even get a steak.
Yeah.
But when you come off watch, you'd go into the what we call dining room, and there was always a refrigerator with cold cuts, coffee. You could get anything you wanted. It didn't make any difference. You could offer 12 o'clock at night. You could go in and eat.
Yeah.
And then they had their regular meals too. And they waited on us. We had messmen. They were part of the crew. And so all we did was just take care of the Navy gear.
Yeah.
And the supplies and the guns. And then I got off of that, and I got another ship, and I went into the Persian Gulf. Went through the Mediterranean.
Did you, when you went into the Persian Gulf, did you go back to the States first and then go into the Persian?
Yeah,
Okay.
made another trip. And we took supplies to.
Do you remember the ship that you were assigned to at that point?
There was UPS. No, that was another one. That one was the one I got in California. I think it was SS Brown or something like that.
Do you remember what you were carrying?
Just supplies for Russia. We were carrying food supplies, some ammunition on some of the ships were ammunition. Incidentally, I forgot to tell you, when in the convoy going to Russia, the outside corners of the convoys, what they call coffin corner, was where the ammunition ship were, because they didn't want them getting blown up in the middle of the convoy.
Okay.
And boy, when they got hit, I'm telling you, all hell broke loose. You know, you'd have 10,000 tons of ammunition on, and when that got hit with a torpedo, it went off. And boy, there'd be stuff coming down for half an hour. You know.
Were you involved with any air raids or anything like that during your time?
We had air raids, and even when we were in Russia, the ships would come over, not continuous, but every once in a while.
Because a lot of the German Air Force had been depleted by
then.
That point.
We weren't. By the time I went there, they weren't as many attacks as they were prior to that, because they bombed hell out of Murmansk, in the early part of the war.
Right. Yeah.
But the trip through the Indian Ocean it was hot. It was so hot.
So this is when you went through the Indian Ocean. You were coming from the East Coast through the Persian Gulf?
From the United States again.
Yeah.
We left from New York.
Yeah.
Because you never know where your ship was. You used to call it the port authorities and say, "Where's my ship?"
Yeah.
And they'd say Pier 94, or East River, or Pier 70, Hudson River.
And so this is a few months after you'd been very cold.
Oh yeah.
Now you were very hot.
I went from there to the heat.
Yeah.
It was so hot that you could fry an egg on the deck.
Wow.
And you weren't allowed outside between the hours of 2 and 6.
So which countries were you stopping in at that point?
We went to Iraq.
Iraq?
Yeah.
Which we may be going to war with shortly.
Iraq.
What was Iraq like?
Well, where we went was very like the desert. Because I remember when we got there, we used to go out at night and watch a movie with the soldiers that were stationed there. Say, "Hey, mate, when did you leave the States?" "Oh, 9 days ago." "How was New York?" All these guys that had been over there.
Yeah.
And they had, you could get some beers over there.
Yeah.
But you could watch movies, and you'd sit on the desert.
Yeah.
And they'd rig up a screen of some sort. And that's all it was around that base, was just the open desert.
Yeah. Did you get it? You didn't get to Baghdad or anything like that, did you?
No. I went to Italy, though. I wound up at, I went to Brindisi, which is way up around the boot of Italy, and Ancona. We had liberty there. We dropped supplies off at Naples, and brought back some prisoners. That's when they started to release some prisoners. But
some United States prisoners.
Right.
Oh.
And I was, was in Antwerp when the war ended. And we were shooting off the guns.
When the Atlantic Theater ended, or when the whole war ended?
No, in Europe.
Okay, in Europe.
In Europe.
Yeah.
VE Day.
Yeah.
And they saw, the ships were all shooting their traces off, and
oh, really?
It was fantastic.
Yeah.
So when I was coming home, the war actually was over in Europe.
Okay.
From there.
Yeah.
And then when I went to Italy, the war was over.
Yeah.
But we were taking supplies there too. And then, because I went by in between Sicily and the main part of Italy to get into Naples to pick up soldiers or prisoners. They were both. And what was funny, on one of the ships, when we first come back and we brought ships from people from Europe, I was walking along, and there were hundreds of guys on the ship. They had no place to sleep. All they did was read and they'd move along like this until
Yeah.
they got fed. They'd stay there until the next time they got fed.
Yeah.
And there was no place to go. There was so many of them, but they wanted to get home.
Right. Yeah.
And of course, I was on a ship's company, so I had nice bunks, and we had freshwater showers.
Oh, wow.
and everything. And so I had a guy said, "Hey, Lahue." I looked up, and here's this redhead, and he was a neighbor of mine, and I grew up with.
Small
and
world.
His name was Lally,
Yeah.
Everett Lally. And oh, geez, I was so glad to see him because you look at all these faces.
Had he been a prisoner or a soldier?
Yes. Yeah,
he
was
had been a
He was
prisoner.
a prisoner, but he was coming home.
How was he doing?
Oh, good. He looked good. They
Yeah.
were taken care of.
Yeah.
And so I said, "You come with me."
Yeah.
So he ate with us, and I gave him a cold water shower. And I said, "When I'm on watch, you sleep in my
Yeah.
bed, and all over until we come back to the States." And I used to see him after that, and he just loved it.
So, did the war end for you then, or were you shipped
No,
off?
I got back from there, and I went to the Fargo building.
Yeah.
I reported back at the Fargo building. And I saw a guy come along with a lot of scrambled eggs on his hat, and I looked at him and I said, "Hey, Jimmy." I went to high school with him. He was a lieutenant commander.
Yeah.
And I said, "Jimmy, well, how are you?" I said, "Hey, I've been at sea for about 18 months. I said, "Is there any chance of sticking around this place for a while?" "Sure," he said. "So, can you type?" "Sure, I can type." So he said, "You go and see this guy in personnel." So I went over there, and he said, "Do you type?" I said, "No, just my fingers." "Make out these cards, 3x5 cards. Name, rank, serial number." That's all I did.
Yeah.
So I went home that night. I used to go home on a train.
Yeah.
And I said to my wife, "Show me how to type." So anyway, I stayed there for a while, and it was good. I come
Yeah.
back and forth every day on
Yeah.
the train. And I never even slept
Yeah.
at the Fargo building, which I was supposed to.
Yeah.
So finally, I got word, no more Liberty, shipping out. Oh boy! And we had planned we were going to a prom or something,
Yeah.
and all dressed up there. And I had to call home and tell my wife, I'm not coming. I got to get shipped out. So next day, we went down and we got on the train, and we went to California.
Yeah.
What a ride. Every time an express train went through, you'd pull over to the side. It took us about 10 days to go
Yeah.
across the country. And I can remember the corn. Corn and corn
There's a
and
lot of
corn
corn.
and corn. And we'd go by factories,
Yeah.
Sometimes the train would stop and the people would come out of the factories and they'd give us stuff,
Yeah.
on the train. And I can remember one time they stopped and was right beside a watermelon patch, and
Yeah.
everybody got out off the train to grab the watermelons. And finally, I wound up in Oakland at a Navy base. And then I was assigned to a ship that was anchored under the Golden Gate Bridge,
Yeah.
the APA 97. And I went over to Manila, Leyte, Samar,
Yeah. Oh,
Eniwetok.
wow. How
And-
long did you? Oh, I think we got to have you back one more time.
Well, it's a while. That's
That's a whole nother story there, right? Can we have you back to talk about
Oh,
that one more
sure.
time? Okay. Listen, Dick, thank you
I
so
mean,
much.
I hope I'm not taking too much time. Because
Absolutely not.
I could-
Absolutely not. I mean, this
could
is a whole
experiences
world
for-
that I haven't experienced. I want to thank you very much for being with us. Thank you very much for joining us for
Well,
this
it's
show
a
about
joy.
history.
It's a pleasure to be here.
Okay, great.
War II, Rationing. And the Screen magazine, in its second issue, tried to explain to me and he wanted to know that what he could do if they were true. The world greater city become a monument to the courage and faith of the uncommon American.
back to the History Show, and we're really lucky to be taping a third program with Dick Lahue. These programs are going to be archived and available in the Chelmsford Library, and also they will be sent to Washington, where the Library of Congress is archiving these. If you know some people who have, especially veterans, especially some of the older veterans, we're trying to archive their history. This is a national project where their records will be kept in an oral history project at the Library of Congress. But you can contact us at Chelmsford Telemedia here. The number is 978-251-5143, or you can also email to studio@chelmsfordtv.org. Dick Lahue, thank you very much for being back with us. You've got, it seems like you've lived 5 or 6 lives in your lifetime. Maybe you've got a couple more to go still.
Well, I hope so.
Yeah.
I feel as though I'm very fortunate to have lived this long.
Yeah.
And fortunate to have survived the war. The only time I ever went to the sick bay was with an ingrown toenail. So
they can be painful.
yes, but other than that, I was lucky.
Yeah.
I just didn't. I can remember one time in the North Sea when we were first going over, and a limey tanker, we call it limey, the English tanker, rammed us in the North Sea because it was so foggy. And I remember running out on deck, and here's the bow of this ship right there. It looked like the Empire State Building. And the captains were hollering at one another and flashing their messages and stuff.
Yeah.
One was blaming the other. And they poked a little hole in our,
Really?
in our ship. And in fact, we wound up in Glasgow, Scotland, and had in the shipyards to have the ship fixed. And that was an experience. I had a wonderful time.
Yeah. Oh, did you? Like,
because we were in port, and we were going to go ashore every day.
yeah.
And I used to have a fellow that worked with me before I went into service. His name was Philip Furlong, and he came from Scotland.
Yeah.
And Glasgow, yeah.
Yeah.
I'm getting mixed up. Belfast.
Okay.
I went into Belfast. And that's where the ship was,
Okay.
Northern Ireland.
Yeah.
And we had a lot of fun there because we would get food from the kitchen.
Yeah.
And in fact, I can remember getting like a 15-pound wholemeal ham, canned ham and potatoes and stuff, and took it in the pub. Because everybody lives in a pub over there.
Yeah.
And that was the last day when we were going. We had one great feed.
Oh, really?
But I got mixed up about this furlong.
Yeah.
When I was in Scotland, I went to visit his sister
Yeah.
because he told me that he came from Scotland. He still had a sister living in Belfast. So I went to the town office and I asked somebody if there's anybody named of Furlong. And of course she had married, so her name was different. But there was an old guy there, and he said he remembered the name. And he said, oh yeah, that's, so and so and so. And so I went to visit her, and it was just before Christmas, and she had some children. And they hadn't seen an orange in 6 years. So we brought oranges.
Yeah.
And we used to be able to buy Hershey chocolate bars by the box
Yeah.
at a ship store. And I brought candy bars and stuff for Christmas for them. Oh, I went back a couple of times to visit them
Yeah.
while I was there.
Oh, so really, you stayed in?
Yeah, it was nice to meet somebody
Yeah.
that I never knew.
Yeah.
And I wrote to her a couple of times after. I don't know what happened. I think she stopped writing. I can't remember what the reason was, but it's a long time ago.
Now, while you were in the Navy, though, which is, we talked about this at the other shows and stuff, but you were not assigned to Navy ships. You were basically providing.
Well, when I went to California, that's a Navy ship.
You did go to a Navy ship.
That is a Navy ship.
Okay.
It's an assault ship, a salt ship.
Right.
And it carried these APAs, these boats that they take off. And
How was the transition to a regular Navy ship?
well, the regimentation is a little bit different.
Yeah.
See, it was pretty lax as far as the rules and stuff on the Liberty ships.
Yeah.
As long as you got along and, it didn't cause any trouble, nobody bothered you. But on the other ones, you always have these eager beavers that.
What was your rank? Well,
I was just a seaman.
A seaman. But the entire time that you were in the Navy, you were
A Navy gunner.
a Navy gunner working on a
Merchant
20 millimeter?
No, 5-inch 38.
5-inch 38, I'm sorry.
That we had 4 20 millimeter gun tubs.
Okay.
2 on each side forward, 2 in each aft. Those were manned by somebody else. I was assigned to this big gun on the aft.
Okay, which is basically a cannon.
Yes, it's the biggest gun on the ship.
Yeah.
And you mentioned, how quick was it? Well, there was a fuse on the end, and you could set it for distance to explode. So that had to be twisted by one of the crew.
Okay.
500 yards, 1,000 yards, whatever, before it would explode.
So that's not set by the gun or anything?
Oh, no. See,
How large is the crew for?
there were about 7 guys on the aft gun.
Okay.
And about 5 up front, and then you had the 20 millimeter guys. But everybody had to man the guns when it was time.
And what exactly were you doing when you were manning a gun?
My job was the pointer. I pulled the trigger. I knew when that thing was going off. As it bobbed, there was this big circle with hairs. You got one man shifted the gun sideways and one went up and down. So when that crosshairs got on the target, and you had to allow for the wave of the ship, the swell of the ship, of the ocean, when you were firing, because when you either come down or you went up, and that was like practice. That's what you practiced. And but I knew when that thing was going off. You had earplugs, but that would go off, and my pants would sting my legs from the backlash.
Yeah.
From that going off. It was so powerful.
And then you had different people who would load it.
There was a loader, and there was a hot shellman who took it out. He's the one that had the big asbestos gloves.
Yeah.
And then there was people taking the ammunition from down below, the ammunition locker, bringing it up into what they called a storage case that had a lot of shells right on the deck. But then when you used them all up, they had to come out of the ammunition room, which was. I slept right on top of it.
Really?
That was our forecastle was right on top of
the
ammunition thing. And I remember one time going down there and I could see these eyes, and it's kind of a rat. Boy, that rat was about as long as that. So I went back up and I told the officer, geez, I said, a big rat down there in the locker room. He went down and shot it,
Right where you keep the ammunition?
Well, it was just out. We coaxed it out, so it was out in the passageway.
Oh, okay. I hope, because I would have been a little nervous about a ricochet or something like that.
Oh, geez, all hell would have gone. But that was, it was a little incident. Now, I haven't thought about that, for God's sake, for years.
Yeah.
But I remember that on that trip.
We had talked about in some of the previous shows about you had shipped up to northern Russia. You had brought supplies to Iraq that had been shipped to Russia. And you'd also been Antwerp, Belgium, and Europe. And then the war ended when you were in Belgium, and for a while you were able to...
well, I made another trip over.
You made another trip over
Europe.
And then eventually you were shipped out to California.
I got leave, and I went home, and then I got, as I say, I wound up at the Fargo building, and then was transferred to California.
Yeah.
Was put on the APA 97 and went over to the Pacific.
When you went over to the Pacific, was the war over in the Pacific, or was it still?
Yes.
Okay.
I had a few. You see, you had to get credits, and when you got so many credits, you could get out.
Yeah.
And I was shy. I don't know, 3 or 4.
Yeah.
In fact, I became eligible on the way over. So I had to stay in until we got back.
Yeah.
But I forget how many points you had to have or something to get out.
So you shipped out from California for the fabled South Pacific.
Yeah. Went across, and we stopped in Hawaii, and went on to Leyte, Samar, Eniwetok, Those were islands, nothing left of them.
Yeah.
A few palm trees, because they...
What were you doing going to those
just
various places?
bringing supplies and bringing people back. Sailors and army that were over there because the war was over.
So you would pick them up and take them away?
Bring them back.
And what were some of these islands?
Well, there was not much left because they bombed them. They just flattened them.
Yeah.
Anything that was there. And because the Japanese had occupied all those, and they went from island to island to island to eliminate the Japs. And some of them, of course, were some had ledge and they had tunnels and stuff, and the Japs wouldn't come out, and boy, they'd get these big flamethrowers, open that flame, and it would shoot right in that would drive them out.
Yeah.
You know. But that was during the war, and I wasn't involved in that.
Right, yeah.
I wasn't involved in that, in any of that fighting at all. I just was on the ship just to bring supplies.
At how many different islands were you going around to at that point?
Well, those were the ones I went to. Those were the 5 that I went to.
Can you say them again?
Leyte.
Okay.
Samar,
which is in the Philippines, right?
Anahuac, the Philippines.
Yeah.
And then we of course we stopped in Hawaii.
Yeah.
On the way back, which was like halfway.
Yeah.
But there was no war going on, and there was no. You had more freedom.
Yeah.
To do what you wanted to do and write what you wanted to write and stuff. Before, like that picture there, you weren't the lieutenant, who was our commanding officer, had to read your letters. I mean, you weren't supposed to divulge anything, where you were going, or anything like that. And of course, my wife didn't know where I was going, and I had that picture taken in Glasgow.
Now this picture right up here.
Yeah. My Navy picture. And on the back of it, it said some studio in Glasgow. So I sent it home. So she,
yeah.
I don't know how it got through, but she knew that at least I was there.
Now, also behind here, we have some of these different medals and stuff that indicate...
well, these are service medals. This is the World War II Victory Medal and the Asiatic Pacific, the European Theater, and the Good Conduct Medal. These up above are from Russia, the government, Russian government, and Boris Yeltsin signed these letters, or sent them.
Yeah.
And that was for 40 years after the end of they call it the Great War.
Now, out of curiosity, how did the Russians even know you were there?
Well, you have to fill out a form stating the ship you were on, what date you were there, in order to be certified that you were eligible, that you did make a trip to Russia, which I did.
How'd you find out about this program?
I get in that paper.
Okay.
The paper I got said anybody who made the Merrimack's Run is eligible for these things, so just send in your thing. So the second one came 10 years after that, still from Boris Yeltsin, but it was the 50th anniversary of the end of the Great War, they called it. But that was in appreciation for us bringing supplies and things to the Russian people during the war.
When you were on the cargo ships in the European theater, you were not. You weren't with the same, even the same Navy crew.
No.
I mean,
every ship was different.
So it's a little bit different than a lot of the other.
Where you get
Navy
on a ship and you stay your entire lifetime. Although you realize on some of these big ships, you have divisions. You could be on there with your brother and never see him, ever.
Yeah.
You get 5,000 guys on a ship, and they're in 4 divisions. They stay in their division. They work, sleep, eat in their division. So you don't have that running all over the place.
What would a day in the life on one of these ships? Can you talk about that?
Well, regular. You had your regular everyday duty of staying on watch, 4 on, 8 off.
And this goes 24 hours.
24 hours a day.
Okay.
And you'd be on like 1 to 4, be off from 4 to 12. You go back on from 12 to 4, and 8 hours off, unless there was general quarters.
So basically, those 4 hours, you're out there
Just looking
with your
for
gun.
stuff.
You're just looking for stuff.
And you report anything, even if it's a box or anything. It's
Yeah.
rubbish. Anything you spot, because you never know.
Now, who do you report to? Because
You
you
report
have
to the bridge.
the bridge, the merchant
That's the
marine
phone.
captain.
Yes, the bridge.
Okay.
And they have officers, not only the captain, they have the navigation officer and the weather officer and the signalman. All those guys are in what they call the wheelhouse.
So if you go into some type of action, is it those people that are in charge, or?
Well, they're in charge of taking care of the ship. Maneuvering the ship
Yeah.
and everything to keep out of harm's way. We have to fight to down planes or shoot at subs or anything that might be out
Right.
there that's going to harm you.
Yeah.
That was our purpose for being on there.
So as far as the command structure works, though,
We just had a lieutenant that took care of
yeah.
the Navy part of it.
But if you have to do some maneuvering or something
Oh,
like
well,
that,
we had nothing to do with that.
yeah,
We had nothing to do with that. That was all up to the merchant marine captains. And we had one ship, as I remember, it was breaking apart, splitting. The deck would open up and
the ship
close.
you were on, you mean?
Yeah, would open up and it would close. It would open up and it would close as you pitched.
Is this where
It
was
was
this?
above the water line, of course. It was right
is
on
this
the
in the
deck.
North Atlantic, or where's this?
Yeah, in the Atlantic
Yeah.
and North Atlantic.
Okay.
And I can remember seeing half a Liberty ship, the engine room and half a Liberty ship, going along because it had broken off
Wow.
in the heavy seas. It looked so funny.
I mean, at that point, so you're not even
But
dealing.
we only went at about 8 or 10 knots,
Yeah.
which is not much, compared to navigation. I have seen, going across Atlantic, the Queen Mary. We'd see it, and it would slowly
Yeah.
pass you by, and because we're in the same lanes, the lanes you go back and forth to Europe.
How large a convoy?
We had 57 ships in our convoy. Not all of them got in to the submarine nets.
Oh, really?
No, we lost some. Some of the ammunition ships.
So would you know that as you were going along, or?
Oh, you would know when they got torpedoed.
You would.
Oh, sure. Because you were in a group. As I say, 1,000 feet apart, 500 feet in between. And you try to keep that distance. And that's why there was somebody on watch all the time. You would have to, on the bridge, you'd press your phone down and say, hey, we're getting too close to the ship
Yeah.
on the side, or we're getting too close to the ship in front of us, or too close back. And you reported this stuff all the time to the bridge. And the lieutenant really didn't, our lieutenant didn't have anything to do with that. He just had charge of the Navy guy.
Yeah. With your, with the cannon, though, the reality of the situation is, what would you have to, because the submarine's underwater, so you're
Well,
not
they
shooting at
surface
that.
too.
Oh, they would surface.
Oh, well, they do, to see how much damage they do,
Yeah.
Because if they sink ships, they want to come up and see what the heck happened.
Yeah. Did you actually physically see
Well,
any U-boats?
I
or?
saw a sub, maybe come up, 3,000 or 4,000 yards from us. And the little Ds went after it, and it went down.
Yeah.
But that's when they start dropping the depth charges. They throw these big barrels over,
Yeah.
and they can set them for various depths. And but you never know what happened. Well, you just keep going. You don't know whether they sunk it or. There's no way of you knowing what goes on. You might read about it later, but.
So basically, what you're dealing with is you're never dealing with any surface ships or anything.
Not usually. Not usually, particularly in wartime. You didn't have any Navy coming after you, so to speak. And the Atlantic was mostly British ships. They had a lot of ships. Occasionally, you'd see an English destroyer come and they'd talk with the in passing. They have their route that they were covering too.
Now, 8 hours off. What would you do with your?
Oh, you'd sleep. write letters,
Yeah.
do your wash. We used to put our clothes in a pail, and we had a little steam line, a pipe that came up from the boiler room. And because you could look right down the boiler room, it was about 3 decks down, you know, it was kind of open. And you just turn on that steam, and before long your clothes would they'd be clean, believe me.
Now, for someone who had basically been a landlubber, never even on the ocean.
You got to get used to the roll of the sea.
Yeah. And how do you think, I mean, how did you feel about the sea after the year?
It's funny because you almost fall down. You just go, you know, you just lose. You can't realize that you're moving. And it's not abrupt.
Yeah.
It's gradual.
Yeah.
And you're walking along, and all of a sudden, the deck is either coming up to you or it's going down.
Sure.
So
But you get used to that.
Yeah, because you get your what you
So
call
probably
your
it
sea
feels
legs.
pretty strange when you go back to land
Well,
and
you
you
almost
start.
fall down.
Yeah.
You do. You step on the land, you almost fall down because you're so used to kind of rocking with the boat.
Now, you finished your service in the South Pacific. Do you remember when Japan surrendered, or were you still in the States when they surrendered, or?
Yes.
Okay. And
But I made that trip.
Yeah, you made that
afterwards,
trip.
But I was home.
And then you came back to
I
California?
I got on a train. No, I flew home.
Okay.
I went into Burbank.
Yeah.
I pulled into what was the name of it? San Pedro. That was the island, not the island. It was the port of Los Angeles.
Yeah.
But Los Angeles is about 20 miles away. But San Pedro was where the ships came in. And so a bunch of us sailors got together, and we got a taxi, and we hired a taxi, and we all went to Los Angeles. But I went to visit my sister, who was in Pasadena then.
Okay.
And I stayed a couple of days with her.
In Pasadena back then?
Oh, that was quite a city, though, you know.
Oh, so it was a city.
Oh, yeah, because that's where the
Well,
Rose Parade was.
Yeah, and they had the university.
Yeah.
And,
Well, there's a lot of universities out there, all
Yeah.
kinds of schools.
Yeah.
And then,
Of course, that had to seem, compared to
well,
New England.
California weather was so different.
It was
than
beautiful
ours.
then.
Oh,
Then it was clean.
Beautiful, and the flowers and everything are in
Yeah,
bloom.
fruit orchards.
And orchards, even my sister, even now, she goes out and picks oranges and stuff right off the trees.
Yeah.
And
And of course, it
lemons.
wasn't totally paved over back
Oh
then.
no, and it wasn't the growth that is since then.
Did you think about moving out there?
No, it's funny. I enjoyed it there because I was in Oakland for a while, in the Navy base there, and before I shipped out, I was there for a while, and I used to go to San Francisco, down a river street.
How'd you like San Francisco back then?
Oh boy, that's where they used to. That's the first time I ever saw men dressed up as women
Oh, really?
in the nightclubs,
Uh-huh.
and the women dressed up like men.
Yeah, I guess you don't see that
I
too much
couldn't- I
around
couldn't
Lowell
believe-
and Chelmsford.
Jesus, that's beautiful.
Yeah. Yeah, that's
Yeah, we had a good time, and of course I rode the streetcar, you know,
Yeah.
up to top of Nob Hill.
Yeah.
And get a drink.
Take yourself a glass of water. So how'd you get, I mean, you finished
Well,
your
then
service.
I finished my time, and I was eligible to come home.
Yeah.
And they put us on a plane, and we flew across the country. And I can remember flying across Texas, and I thought I'd say, "We still in Texas?" "Yep, still Texas." Boy, that's a big state.
Yeah.
And they had airfields where all these big bombers that they used during the war were.
Were you flying
a-
back on a military plane?
Yeah.
Okay.
And they had these bombers that they was just storing. And
Yeah.
acres of them.
Miles of B-17s,
Yeah.
B-25s.
Couldn't believe it. So
Yeah.
many.
Yeah.
And then before we came, we flew over some of the water, some of the docks, and you'd see all these Liberty ships lined up. You know,
Yeah.
one right after the other. Of course, finally somebody bought them for scrap, I guess.
Sure,
But
yeah.
at that time,
Yeah.
it was just amazing
Wow.
to see all these ships lined up. But I got home, went to Fargo building.
Did they discharge you right when you got back?
I was
or-
there for 2 days. They give you a physical.
Yeah.
And then they talk to you and they ask you got any problems? If do you have any injuries or anything, and I wanted to get out of there so
You
fast.
didn't consider making a career of it?
No. I couldn't get out fast enough.
Yeah.
Because, I mean, I was married and had a child.
Right,
So, hell,
sure.
I don't want to be in the Navy.
Yeah.
And, but I'll tell you, I wouldn't trade that experience for all the money in the world.
Yeah.
It was just, it was fantastic, and I've profited by it ever since.
Yeah.
I got to college for nothing. I went to school.
They
got my
had the
degree,
GI Bill back then.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I still get some benefits from being a veteran. So
Yeah.
it was didn't do it for that reason.
What did you do when you got back out? Or
I went back to work for my brother.
you went back to work in
'Cause he
construction?
He had started up again, and I had charge of a painting crew.
Yeah.
And we did a lot.
Building houses around Chelmsford?
Yes, we started to build over on next to the Glenview.
Okay.
That whole hill, there's 60 houses there,
Yeah.
and we
He bought up all that land and
bought
just
that
built the
all up,
houses and
at
sold
once,
it
and
to.
he bought a lot of land in the Westlands,
Yeah.
and
A lot of guys coming back with the GI Bill.
yeah, and they needed housing,
Yeah. Yeah.
and
And then you went on
And
to
they were-
college on the GI Bill
well,
eventually.
not then. I worked at I left him and I worked at several jobs.
Yeah.
And finally, I got sick. I had ulcers, and I almost died.
Wow.
And in fact, my doctor said to me, if we don't get you in that operating room within the hour, he said, we'll lose you.
Wow.
You're losing too much blood.
Yeah.
And so he operated on me, and I began to feel better. I was out for 6 months, and I used to say, "Oh, gee, doctor, am I ever going to feel good? You'll feel like a new man," he said, when you begin to feel better. He said, "Don't worry." And because he was my doctor, but I used to do work for him.
Yeah.
I'd go to his house on Andover Street, and he'd leave a book, and his wife would have a little book.
Well,
in
he
his
was
room.
right. Here you are, how many years later?
Yeah, he was right. And I had what they called a hiatus hernia
Yeah.
before that. And he said, one good thing about it is you've lost your hiatus hernia. And he said, you'll never be bothered with
Yeah.
acid indigestion again. I never have.
Yeah. Yeah.
So,
And
but then I was out, and I used to go and visit a friend
Yeah.
of mine down at the Lowell Trade School.
right.
And he said, hey, Dick, they're going to be building some new technical high schools. He says, guys, you're a carpenter. He said, why'd you sign up for it? I said, I don't know if I want to do that. He said, come on with me upstairs. We went upstairs into the director's office, and I filled out a form.
Yeah.
And pretty soon I got a call for an oral interview.
Yeah.
And then I had to go down to Weymouth High School for a practical test to give you things to make, cut out a stringer, build 2 horses, saw horses, and things to see if you knew a little bit of what
Right.
you're doing. And so I signed up to go into the National Valley School when
Yeah.
they had the office in the center. This was before the school was even
Oh,
built.
yeah. Okay.
And so then I heard there was an opening in Haverhill.
Yeah.
And I went down to Haverhill, and the superintendent of the trade school there said, we're building a new school down in Amesbury.
Yeah.
And he said, we're not hiring. The guys that are here are going to go into this new school.
Yeah.
But they're not hiring anybody now. So I said, okay. So,
Let me just tell you, we've come to the end of another half hour.
well, we have. It's all over?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Oh, well, okay.
And I think we've kept you here for.
Well, anyway,
You're listening.
between you and I got a teaching. He called me and he said, hey, there's an opening in a school, in a middle school
Yeah.
in Haverhill. Why don't you go down and see if you can get it?
Dick, thank you very much for being with us. And you became a teacher.
Yep, I got my degree.
Yeah.